Welcome to today's episode, where we are talking about food allergies with one of the leading voices in the field, Dr. Carina Venter, PhD, RD. Dr. Venter is a professor of pediatrics in allergy and immunology. She's also a registered clinical dietitian whose work focuses on the prevention, diagnosis, and management of food allergies. With 20 years of experience, more than 270 publications, and a passion for helping families move beyond fear and unnecessary food restrictions, Carina brings both cutting-edge science and real-world clinical insight to the conversations. From early feeding and the microbiome to building tolerance and improving quality of life, Dr. Venter is helping shape the future of food allergy care. Dr. Venter, welcome to Immunity Group Australia podcast. Carina is a leading voice in the food allergy space, not just because of her research, which has been phenomenal, but because of her passion. And Carina, I have never met somebody who presents at more than 20 conferences each year, according to my research. How do you do this?
Well, I do have a very supportive family. Most people say, have you met Karina's husband? So I do have to say, I have a lot to thank him for because he just keeps things going. But I think if you love what you do, which is what I am blessed with, it's not a hardship really. I really enjoy every presentation I give. I always make sure that the slides don't become boring to me. So I always try and have new slides and tell a new story. And then, of course, all the many colleagues around the world that's really become friends. They keep me going. And often when I go to a conference, it really is 50% to go share knowledge, but 50% to meet up with my very dear friends around the world.
And you live in Denver, Colorado, which is, of course, famous for Denver Nuggets and the famous Nikola Jokic. There was a big match yesterday. How did you end up in Colorado?
So, I studied in South Africa, then we moved to England. We only planned to go there for a year, but we end up on the Isle of Wight, which is a renowned allergy center for research. And so I ended up working in the Isle of Wight Allergy Center. That then turned into a master's and a PhD in allergy. And after 20 years on the Isle of Wight, I was contacted by a leading EOE expert from America, or EOE, eosinophilic esophagitis, and he asked me whether I'd be interested to move to the States and come and work with him on a NIH-funded study. And so, really big family decision, but we moved to America. And then from Cincinnati, where I worked at the time, I was recruited by the team at the University of Colorado, David Fleischer and Matt Greenhold, because I've worked with them in the past as well. And they wanted me to come and work on some of the cohorts we have here in Denver. And that's how I ended up in Denver.
That's a beautiful story. And interestingly, that EOE was so prominent back then because now we hear more and more about EOE. But when you started doing the research, probably not much was known in the general sort of awareness space about it.
No, definitely not. And so actually, I was writing a paper on EOE, and I contacted um, Mark Rothenberg, who's one of the world leaders in EOE, on a Sunday night, and said, "Can you send me this paper of yours because I can't seem to access it?" And he then emailed me straight back and said, "Are you a dietitian? I need a dietitian to come help me work on a study." And so it really was because of my lack of knowledge and wanting to increase my knowledge in EOE that I reached out and then got this wonderful opportunity to go and learn from the team in Cincinnati about the diagnosis and management of EOE.
That is so fascinating. And now we're having a lot more, I guess, awareness in the public space in this regard.
Definitely.
I mean, you have done so much work over the past several decades. So, to narrow it down, I guess, for our audience in the Asia Pacific region, one of your major passions is the influence of the maternal diet on the possible allergic outcomes for the offspring. If you were to simplify all that knowledge and experience, why is maternal diet so important and does it actually impact on the allergy status of the future offspring?
Yeah, so when my sisters were pregnant, and then me myself, they'd ask me, what can I eat to prevent allergies in my child? And I didn't have an answer. I'm also blessed that I sit on many guideline groups around the world. And so I am to blame for the guidelines on allergy prevention, which are not really helpful. Because what we're saying is that if you are pregnant, there's no need to avoid the allergens. But, we also don't really know whether we should be eating these allergens. So it's sort of like, do what you do. And there's nothing more we can tell you. And so I led a systematic review uh, funded by the European Academy of Allergy and Clinical Immunology, or EACI, and we reviewed all the papers on maternal diet in pregnancy and child allergy outcome. We looked at nutrients, we looked at foods, we looked at food groups, we looked at food patterns, and at best we were able to say that vitamin D intake in pregnancy may be associated with wheeze. So if you have more vitamin D, then we see reduced wheeze in the infant, as well as asthma. But even that was sort of like debatable, because asthma was diagnosed in these studies before 5 years of age. And as every allergist knows, you can't really diagnose asthma in that younger child. And so I was really, sort of like disappointed, thinking we've got to do better, because I also sit with these pregnant women in my clinic, and they're crying. They want an answer, and they want to know what can they do to prevent allergies in their child. And so here in Colorado, I was working on the Healthy Start study with Dr. Donna Debilia as a PI. She's a well-known expert in the field of prevention of diabetes and obesity. And I said to the statisticians, there's got to be a way that pregnant women should eat to prevent allergies in the children. And so we cut the cohort in half, and we developed, using a complete agnostic statistical model, an index, and then we developed it in the other half. And so really, in essence, and now the question is whether I'm going to remember the 7 components of the index, because I always seem to forget some of it. But what I definitely do know is that we showed that increase of yogurt or fermented food and increase of vegetables was associated with reduced asthma, wheezing, allergic rhinitis, atopic dermatitis, and food allergy up to 2 years of age. But alongside increased intake of vegetables and yogurt, you also need to reduce intake of too much red meat, too much fried food, too much low fiber foods, too much sugary foods. And this one is the complicated one to explain. We don't want you to drink fruit juice. We want you to eat the fruit. So in the groups where the women had more fruit juice and less fruit intake, we actually saw more allergies as well. And so if I can summarize it all, if you eat more vegetables and yogurt, and you reduce your intake of red meat, fried foods, low fiber foods, high sugar foods, and too much fruit juice, we see less allergies in the infant. But then, we always want some mechanistic data to show that, this observational data has got some scientific basis. And so we published the data. We calculated this index in a cohort in Spain, and we looked at the baby's gut microbiome at 1. And the children whose mothers had a better score, so they had the healthier diet based on these 7 components, their babies had a lot more bifidobacteria at 1 month of age, irrespective of the mode of delivery or whether they were breastfed. And so that was a really potent message to show that what you eat in pregnancy can change your child's gut microbiome at 1 month of age in a beneficial way, and then was associated with reduced allergy outcomes in the infants.
That's almost like a public health message for the world across sort of time and space. What is the connection with red meat? That's a really interesting finding about red meat specifically.
Yeah, so I sort of like, I have a double personality when it comes to red meat, because I am a South African, and we do love eating red meat. I also have written a number of papers with my immunomodulation and nutrition group from IACI, particularly Francisca Rolf Walter, indicating how important it is that we have sufficient iron intake to prevent allergies. So it's not a matter of no red meat, it's just a matter of slightly red meat, slightly less red meat. And I wonder if that's an indirect effect, that people who eat more animal-based protein just eat less plant-based protein. And we do know that the plant-based, I've already explained that the vegetables and the fruit are important. So I think it's sort of like not that red meat necessarily is the baddie. We should just eat a little bit less, and that will then inadvertently lead to increased intake of plant-based protein.
And is all red meat the same? I remember in Australia, I mean, this was more than 10 years ago, when people were introducing sort of foods into babies' diet, they would say lamb is the least allergenic meat of all. Now, that was interesting. And Australia has very, very good lamb. We are a lamb exporting country. Is there any credibility to such idea, I guess?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And we didn't actually look at that. Having said that, I would say that in America, particularly here in Denver, we probably mainly eat beef. We may eat some bison. People don't really eat a lot of lamb. People don't tend to eat veal, and we also don't have kangaroo. So, but I think that's a very interesting question.
I love that. I love that answer. They were even advising us to start with lamb before chicken. That was really
Wow,
interesting, kind of
that's
like
good.
on
I
some
mean,
scale.
personally, I love lamb. I also recommend it to babies. Well, it's a good source of iron. We know that the skin of babies with eczema love saturated fats. So the fats in lamb is actually quite good for them. And then on a complete non-nutritional thing, putting lamb in a slow cooker overnight makes it really so nice and soft. And you can actually break it up so that babies can do baby-led weaning with lamb as well. It's much more difficult to get beef at that very soft and tender level as you can get with lamb. So lots of reasons why lamb is definitely a great first weaning food, and definitely one of the first ones I introduce. Also, particularly in children with FPIES, where I'm desperate to get some iron in, and lamb is definitely a low risk FPIES food.
As a clinical dietitian, how much cooking yourself you had to do to sort of test some of this in practice? Was that a difficult component of your job, or how do you deal with that side of things?
Yeah. Well, I hope my children doesn't listen to this podcast, or my children don't listen to the podcast. I do love cooking, but to be honest, I'm a very sort of like a salad person. I love salads, colorful salads, then with a protein alongside that. And normally, because I'm married to a South African, I get away with my husband, barbecuing some lamb or beef or fish or shellfish. If we don't barbecue, we tend to just grill it. Slow cooker is something else we do as well. So I do simple dishes, but it would mainly be a protein alongside a really big salad.
I love that. We met at the FAST OIT Congress in Dallas last year, which is the annual gathering of physicians specializing in OIT and SLIT. And I was absolutely fascinated with your presentation, with one particular slide. And that's why I really always wanted to ask you. In one of your slides, you mentioned that OIT doses in particular can be taken with things, which are chewable things, that applesauce or very simply sort of liquidy base is not actually recommended. What is the science behind it? Like what happens to us while chewing, and how is that beneficial with OIT when it comes to those more chewable foods, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So I think that there's two answers to that. The one is when we have like chewable forms of OIT, we do actually mix it with saliva, and some digestion is already happening. And also we sort of like neutralize the pH. But the problem that we have when we particularly mix allergenic foods with baby foods coming out of a pouch. Baby foods coming out of a pouch actually has a very low pH, and we don't have to chew. And so this food, this allergen in a very low pH environment goes straight down the esophagus. And we think that may be one of the reasons also why we see more EOE. This is all very much hypothetical rather than proving data. But I think it is the whole combination of not really starting to digest the allergen, not neutralizing pH, and then, it's get presented to the esophagus and the stomach in a very much low pH, undigested form.
So, can we say that EOE and perhaps reflux are connected, or is there anything to do with that sort of reacting to certain foods through reflux that could sort of
Yeah.
indicate? Yeah.
And it's a question I often ask is, how many babies with reflux or reflux disease actually have EOE? And so I definitely think they are connected. There's also two things going on there. Babies with reflux, every time I give a talk on EOE, I say, how many people in the room scope babies under 12 months of age? And almost nobody puts a hand up because, we don't really want to scope babies that young for the most. And so we often just treat them as refluxers when actually they may be having EOE. I keep looking at the literature to see if there's anybody that's actually looking at these longitudinal cohorts to see what happens to the refluxers later on. But the other thing about reflux also is that, even though the NASPGHAN and international guidelines recommend that the children should be treated first with a hypoallergenic formula before we use a PPI, often they go on PPI straight away. And we do know that PPI is just not great for the gut microbiome. And so when we change the gut microbiome, we also get an increased risk for EOE. So there's sort of like two things going on there. And perhaps we're not correctly diagnosing EOE in the young kids, and perhaps treating their gut with PPI predispose them to develop EOE. So interesting question, but as many things in food allergy, we don't really have straight answers
That's no,
always available.
that's a great answer. When it comes to microbiome, obviously as a clinical dietitian, you are the forefront of this research. Have personal interest in that. However, many doctors, especially in Australia, including allergists and even gastroenterologists, not to mention general practitioners, don't even consider microbiome, even when they diagnose food allergies or in any shape or form. As a clinician, when you encounter those attitudes, what is the best way? Is it education, or is it how do you deal with that lack of knowledge and recognition of such an important part of our body?
Yeah, so there's again many answers to that. So I'm just about to publish, I've already submitted abstracts to the American Academy of Allergy, American Academy of Pediatrics, and another few nutrition societies to data that I have showing that healthcare professionals in America really do not understand the gut microbiome and the role of pre, pro, and symbiotics in managing children with cow's milk allergy. So there definitely is a clear lack of knowledge. I mean, I think we have to educate. I think we perhaps need to start with dietitians and make sure that all dietitians know how to address microbiome issues. I definitely in our clinic, I always say to the doctors, I need enough time. I'm not just going to give somebody a little sheet with this is how you need to read a food label to avoid peanut allergy or avoid milk. That is a small part of my consultation. The largest part of my consultation is really making sure that children grow appropriately, and then we address overall nutrition and gut microbiome. So in June this year, there's a NIH conference, and then 2 weeks later, we have the European Academy Conference, where I and Liam O'Mahony will be presenting my data here from Colorado, looking at the gut microbiome of children with food allergies. And it absolutely needs to be addressed. These children, they just don't digest fibers appropriately. So even though you actually can give them a healthier diet, they may not actually really have the benefit of the healthy diet unless you also supplement them with appropriate probiotics so that they can break these bacteria down. We find that the children with food allergies, the metabolome looks completely different. So much more data, available now to say you cannot just address allergen avoidance. You really need to address the overall diet. And in some children, they may really need a probiotic alongside the healthy diet, at least for an interim period. which I don't know how long that is. I normally just clinically deal with a 6 months probiotic supplementation alongside a healthier diet. But yeah, we need to really address that in clinic.
That's a wonderful comment about inability to digest fiber. I don't think many have mentioned that before in Australia, especially. I'm a mother of kids with two different food allergies. One has nuts, one has cow's milk since birth, pretty much infancy, and egg allergy. And now after completing OIT, it's interesting to see that especially the child who has completed milk and egg OIT, food aversion is real. She likes perhaps some cheeses, but a massive detest of anything that's more milky. So I wanted to ask you, in terms of cow's milk protein, and this is your field, what is the latest research when it comes to kids with food allergies who may have been desensitized, and when they finish, are they able to tolerate other types of milk? And do you also see this food aversion even after finishing the
Oh,
programs?
yes. I published data from the Isle of Wight where we looked at children who had a milk allergy in the first year of life, and then we followed them up at 10 years. So they've outgrown their milk allergy by 1, 2 years of age. And they didn't like ice cream. They didn't like yogurt. They still didn't really want to eat cheese. So even though they weren't allergic anymore, they still had the aversion to the milk containing foods. And we definitely see that in children with oral immunotherapy. I think one of the most common, questions I get in a food allergy clinic is, we've reached the 2000 milligram dose. How am I going to get the kid to eat milk products 3 times a week or egg products 3 times a week? So aversion definitely is an issue. I think, we sometimes work with feeding therapists. My role as a dietitian is really to try and find some format of a milk containing food or an egg containing foods that they can eat. So cheese crackers, for example, normally goes down well, but we know that cheese don't have all the beta lactoglobulin that we need. So sometimes I'll see perhaps there's a certain flavor of yogurt that they will eat, or perhaps they like yogurt mixed with cereal, that kind of thing. But it really feels to me like, it's like an investigation to find something that will work for every child. So yeah, it definitely, the taste aversion is an issue.
I loved your pouches. I've tried the pouches
Oh,
which we have, tasted.
yeah.
And this is about kind of, it can be used as prevention or maintenance OIT, but they were so tasty and very rich. Is that a potential future for the food allergy community to sort of find something that's almost fiber rich, but in such a small packaging
Yeah.
that still tastes amazing?
So actually on the 7th of May, we are launching 3 bars. We are using a peanut bar, launching a sesame bar, and then a mixed a tree nut bar. And the dosages in the bars differ. Some of them contain 500 milligram and some contain 1,000 milligram. We're making sure that the allergens are equally spread, but the bars have got a very similar composition as the packets, or the paste. And so they're full in fiber, they're full in vegetables and fruit. And so we're hoping that that may be at least a way to get at least sesame, peanuts, and tree nuts into children in terms of a longer term tolerance. So yeah, we're trying our best to get healthy ways to get children to eat the allergens once they, have manage to get to the top dose of OIT, whatever the top dose may be, because that, of course, as you know, differ from child to child.
That's absolutely fascinating, and we would love to receive some of the bars in Australia.
Well,
Is it
I
possible?
may actually, I may send you some after Iyaki, because I know of at least 2 Australian researchers coming to Istanbul for the conference, so I can send you some.
That would be lovely. We would love to try and hopefully promote the actual bar once it's available on the global market. You are very active in EACI, and this is the European, the largest organization in the world, really, in this space. And you were at the forefront of developing new guidelines. As a clinician, how difficult it is to be in this position, because not only you're active in that, you just received the most amazing award in America next to Mr. Fauci. So if you don't mind perhaps telling us first about the award, and then how is it to be at the forefront of writing guidelines globally?
Yeah, so I am, like I said before, I am very blessed with my career. I received the Allied Health Professionals Recognition Award, and so normally at American Academy yearly, there's an Allied Health Professional receiving an award for a lifetime achievement, as well as a clinician or two clinicians, and then a scientist. And it so happens this year when we walked into the room, there was this man coming in with five lifeguards or what security officers, whatever the correct term is. And I said to my guest, Marion Groach, a dietitian from Mount Sinai, she's very close to my heart. I said, Marion, do you think this is Dr. Fauci? And she said, yes, it is him. And so on the day, I received this award alongside Dr. Fauci. And he did ask me afterwards if I'd like to take a picture with him, which was really an incredible moment in my life and career and something I will treasure for a long time. So that's sort of like my award. And, thank you for those people who suggested me. And, but then in terms of Iyaki, I love working with the IACI guidelines because we literally get, experts from around the world, to be take part. I'm currently working on a food ladder guideline. We definitely need a food ladder guideline. And so I have Pete Smith from Brisbane in Australia and Vicky McWilliam from Melbourne as part of the group. And then I literally have pulled experts from all over the world to participate in the guidelines. IACI really provides us with an amazing platform where we can get funding. We can apply for funding to support the systematic reviews. And then we just have all these wonderful experts that get on well, happy to share their knowledge. So as much as it's a lot of work, chairing and, leading these guidelines, it's not really a hardship because everybody is so extremely supportive.
That's wonderful. And having someone like yourself who is so collaborative makes it probably better in every sense. How is AI changing your field? Is there much fear or using the opportunity? What is the sentiment right now in the field?
You know, so I actually enjoy ChatGPT just when I need a little bit of amusement. And so I would say to ChatGPT, can you provide me with a list of all the papers Carina Venter ever wrote? And ChatGPT will actually make up the references. It will give me names of papers I've never written with collaborators I've never met. And so you have to be very careful. I think where AI is particularly helpful, and in the last few papers that I've been involved in, is really helping us to create infographics, or graphical abstracts in a very, very nice way that people can easily, it helps us to really turn complex information into a simple figure. And so that's where I see the positive of AI. I think, when it comes to writing papers, providing reference lists, we still have a long way to go. I mean, English is actually not my first language either. I speak Afrikaans, but also my other non-English speaking colleagues around the world. I think everybody finds the grammatical correction of whatever we've written, very helpful. And so I think, that's sort of like the kind of thing. I mean, I know lots of people now use it for cover letters, which I don't think is the right thing to do. I don't think you should be using AI to write your paper. Perhaps using it just to correct your grammar is not the end of the world. But also, AI is happening, and there's no point saying that AI is the baddie and we don't want to know about AI. I think just like in any other medical profession, we need to learn how to best use AI to get correct information out there, but perhaps help us to simplify that information.
I love that. No fear, but again, be prepared, not scared, almost like
Yeah,
with food
yeah,
allergies. Well, we wish you much success in Istanbul. So that's happening in the next couple of months, mid June, isn't it?
yeah, mid-June, mid-June.
Mid-June. And let's have another chat perhaps after a few months after that summit. I'm sure there'll be so many new ideas happening. And I know that Professor Chesmiakis from Switzerland is very active in this space, especially in terms of preventing all the stressors and triggers which impact the body. After our podcast with him, literally I went to the shop and changed my toothpaste the same day. So
Well, I do work a lot with Professor Actors, on many guidelines. And I can tell you that after a meeting we had in Singapore, actually, I came back home, I got rid of all the plastics and microplastics in our house. But
yeah.
these glass containers, they're pretty heavy. So my kids are complaining about, the heavy storage containers we have now. But yeah, always learning. There's just so much to learn, and yeah, I hope there's never a day when I'm gonna feel like I know it all.
Professor Venter, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.